Looking back, I wonder if I missed the signs. Maybe I didn't want to see them. Karen and I had been married for almost a decade, and for the most part, I thought we were happy. Life had its challenges, work stress, family expectations, but we were a team. Or at least, I thought we were. It started small. Karen would come home later than usual, claiming she had to stay late at the office. I believed her. She'd been under a lot of pressure at work, and I figured she needed space. But then there were other things. The way she avoided eye contact when I asked about her day, the hush phone calls, and the sudden need to keep her phone locked. It was subtle, but it planted a seed of doubt. The real wake-up call came from an unexpected place. My best friend, Ron. One evening, he showed up at my doorstep looking uncomfortable, almost apologetic. "Daniel," he said, "there's something you need to see." He handed me a small envelope, its contents heavier than any words he could have spoken. Inside were photographs, blurry but unmistakable. Karen at a restaurant, leaning close to another man. Her smile, the way she touched his arm. It wasn't the kind of affection she'd shown me in years. My stomach churned as I stared at the evidence. I didn't know whether to thank Ron or slam the door in his face. I confronted Karen that night. I held up the photos, my hands shaking as I demanded an explanation. She froze, her face a mix of shock and guilt. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, but then she sighed, almost as if relieved to stop pretending. "It's not what you think," she said, the classic line of someone caught red-handed. "We're just friends. I was going to tell you." Her voice trailed off, and the excuses poured out. Work stress, loneliness, feeling like I wasn't present enough. All reasons she used to justify her betrayal. Hearing those words shattered something inside me. Anger boiled to the surface. How dare she blame me? But beneath the rage was a deep, aching sadness. This was the woman I'd built my life with, the person I thought I knew better than anyone. And now, all I could see was a stranger. I barely slept that night. Questions swirled in my mind. How long had this been going on? Was there even a chance to salvage what we had? Or was this the end of everything we'd built together? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing. I couldn't ignore this. After that night, things between Karen and me were tense, like walking through a minefield where every step threatened to trigger an explosion. She insisted that it was nothing serious, just a fleeting connection that didn't mean anything. But her words didn't align with her actions. The way she avoided me, the sudden trips to visit her sister, and the ever-present phone glued to her side, it was all too suspicious. I needed more than her half-hearted denials. I needed the truth. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. It felt like a drastic move, but I couldn't live in this limbo of doubt and suspicion. If Karen wouldn't give me answers, I'd find them myself. The PI, a no-nonsense guy named Mark, laid out a detailed plan. He'd start with basic surveillance, following Karen during her routine and documenting anything out of the ordinary. He also suggested I gather evidence on my own, searching for inconsistencies in her emails or phone records. I wasn't proud of it, but I agreed. The waiting was excruciating. Every day felt like an eternity, and every interaction with Karen was tainted by my growing suspicion. I began to notice details I hadn't before. The way she dressed up a little more than usual, the text she'd quickly swipe away when I walked into the room. It was like living with a puzzle I couldn't quite solve. Then one evening, Mark called. "I've got something," he said. My heart sank. The photos he sent were even more damning than the ones Ron had given me. Karen, arm in arm with the same man, Greg, as Mark later identified him, leaving a hotel together. The timestamps matched one of her so-called work trips. It was undeniable now. She wasn't just meeting someone for dinner. This was a full-blown affair. Fueled by equal parts heartbreak and anger, I took matters into my own hands. I planted a small audio recorder in her car, desperate to hear her side of things when she didn't know I was listening. The recordings were painful. Intimate phone calls, whispered plans, and even complaints about our marriage. Hearing her talk about me, about us, with such cold detachment was like a knife to the chest. The final blow came when I stumbled upon her personal emails. I'll never forget the sinking feeling as I read through them. Explicit messages exchanged with Greg, declarations of love, and even discussions about the possibility of leaving me. The woman I'd trusted with my heart, my life, was living a lie, and I had the proof to show it. By the time I confronted Karen again, there was no room for denial. I laid out everything I'd found, the photos, the recordings, the emails. She looked at me, her face pale, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret in her eyes. But instead of an apology, she doubled down. "You've been snooping through my life?" she snapped, her voice rising. "How do you expect me to stay in a marriage where I can't even breathe?" Her words hit like a slap. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was angry at me for catching her. That was the moment I knew we'd crossed a line we couldn't come back from. After that confrontation, the air between us was suffocating. Karen stopped pretending altogether. Her late nights became more frequent, and the icy silence that filled our home was louder than any argument we'd ever had. It felt like living with a ghost, someone who looked like the woman I married but acted like a stranger. I thought I'd reached my limit, but then came the revelation that broke me entirely. One night, while Karen was asleep, I came across a folder tucked away on her laptop. Inside were more emails with Greg, but these weren't just about their affair. They revealed something I never saw coming. Karen's supposed infertility, the reason we'd spent years trying and failing to have a family, was a lie. I sat there, staring at the screen in disbelief. She wasn't infertile. She'd been on birth control, intentionally preventing us from having children. The one thing I clung to, the idea that we'd one day raise a family together, had been nothing but an illusion. I couldn't breathe. It felt like the foundation of my life had crumbled beneath me, leaving nothing but emptiness. The next morning, I confronted her one last time. I didn't hold back. "Why, Karen?" I asked, my voice trembling with equal parts rage and despair. "Why would you lie about something so important?" Her response was a mix of defiance and indifference. "I wasn't ready for kids, Daniel," she said, shrugging like it was no big deal. "And honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to have them with you." That was it, the final nail in the coffin. Whatever part of me still hoped we could salvage our marriage died in that moment. Her words were a cold reminder that the woman I'd loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize and didn't want to. I didn't even wait for her to leave for work before I started packing her things. If she wanted a life with Greg, she could have it. I wasn't going to stand in the way of her deceit any longer. By the time she came home that evening, half her belongings were in boxes. I handed her the keys to the apartment she'd been renting in secret and told her to leave. Karen didn't fight me on it. She simply took the keys, gave me one last look, and walked out the door. I stood there, watching her go, and felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that it was over, and sadness for everything we'd lost, or maybe never really had. The days after Karen left were some of the hardest of my life. The silence in the house, once a source of tension, now felt deafening. Every corner of the home we'd built together seemed to mock me with memories of better times. Our wedding photos on the mantel, the couch where we'd spent lazy Sunday afternoons, the kitchen where we used to laugh while making dinner. I hated all of it. For a while, I couldn't bring myself to touch anything. Her things still lingered in the places she'd left them, an old sweater draped over a chair, her favorite mug on the counter. I knew I should box it all up and move on, but I couldn't. Not yet. It was like admitting that everything we'd shared had truly ended. Work became my escape. I threw myself into it with a level of intensity that bordered on unhealthy. Staying late at the office, volunteering for extra projects, it was easier to focus on spreadsheets and deadlines than to sit alone with my thoughts. But even then, Karen was always in the back of my mind. I replayed every moment of our relationship, wondering where it had gone wrong, what I could have done differently. The guilt gnawed at me, even though I knew her choices weren't my fault. One evening, about 2 weeks after she'd moved out, I received a call from Christy, Greg's wife. I'd contacted her shortly after discovering the affair, partly out of a sense of justice, and partly because I needed someone who understood what I was going through. At first, our conversations were awkward and guarded, but over time, they became a strange kind of lifeline. She was the only person who truly got it, the only one who didn't look at me with pity or awkward concern. "I thought you should know," she said that night, her voice trembling. Greg and Karen are flying to Honolulu tomorrow. He just told me. Some kind of romantic getaway, apparently. I could hear the bitterness in her tone, and for once, I didn't blame her. Of course they are, I muttered. It was exactly the kind of selfish, reckless thing I'd come to expect from Karen. Part of me wanted to lash out, to send her one last scathing text. But what would have been the point? She'd already made her choice, and nothing I said would change that. Christy and I stayed on the phone for hours that night, venting, sharing stories, and piecing together the timeline of their betrayal. It was oddly comforting to have someone to talk to, someone who wasn't telling me to move on or let it go. We even joked about confronting them at the airport, though we both knew we'd never go through with it. The next morning, I woke up to the news that would change everything. A plane bound for Honolulu had gone down in the Pacific with no survivors. Karen and Greg were on that flight. At first, I couldn't process it. The words felt unreal, like something out of a bad dream. I spent hours staring at the news reports, reading and rereading the passenger list, hoping it was a mistake. But it wasn't. They were gone. What followed was a whirlwind of emotions: grief, shock, anger, and, oddly enough, relief. I felt terrible for thinking it, but a part of me was glad I didn't have to deal with Karen anymore. No divorce battles, no awkward run-ins, no lingering questions. It was over in a way I hadn't expected, but it was over. In the days that followed, Christy and I leaned on each other more than ever. We attended the memorial services together, shared stories about our spouses, and tried to make sense of the mess they'd left behind. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I felt like I was drowning in guilt and regret, wondering if I'd been too harsh, if I'd missed my chance to say something that might have mattered. But Christy was always there to remind me that none of this was my fault. One evening, as we sat in my living room, sipping wine and sorting through Karen's belongings, Christy said something that stuck with me. "You know, Daniel, maybe this is our chance to start over, to figure out who we are without them." Her words hit me harder than I expected. She was right. For the first time in years, I had the opportunity to rebuild my life, free from the lies and betrayals that had defined it for so long. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe Christy and I could help each other heal. Maybe, just maybe, we could turn this tragedy into something new. In the weeks following the crash, life felt surreal. The news coverage, the condolences from friends and family, the endless paperwork, it was all a blur. Losing Karen wasn't the same as losing a partner you loved deeply. My grief was complicated, tangled with anger and unresolved questions. I wasn't mourning the Karen I'd known in the last year. I was grieving the person I thought she was, the life we were supposed to have. Christy became my anchor during this time. We found ourselves drawn to each other, not romantically, at least not yet, but as two people trying to make sense of a shared loss. She was strong in a way I admired, balancing her sorrow with a biting wit that kept me grounded. When the weight of it all became too much, she'd crack a dark joke about Greg's penchant for expensive wine or Karen's obsession with appearances. It wasn't the healthiest coping mechanism, but it worked for us. One afternoon, we decided to face the mess Karen and Greg had left behind. Christy suggested we tackle Karen's apartment first, the one she'd been renting in secret for months. Walking through that door was like stepping into a stranger's life. The decor was minimal but tasteful, far more modern than the style she'd insisted on for our home. Her perfume lingered in the air, and the sight of her things, clothes, books, photos, brought an unexpected lump to my throat. Together, we went through it all box by box. There were moments of discovery that felt like reopening old wounds. I found a small jewelry box containing a necklace I'd given her for our 5th anniversary, tucked away like an afterthought. Christy uncovered a stack of letters from Greg, filled with saccharine declarations of love that made us both cringe. We even found a few plane tickets for trips they'd planned together, trips she'd claimed were business-related. "Unbelievable," Christy muttered, holding up a lingerie set with the tags still attached. "I guess this wasn't for you?" Her attempt at humor earned a weak laugh from me, but the truth of it stung. I hated how much she'd lied, how much of our life together had been a facade. By the end of the day, we'd packed up most of Karen's belongings. We agreed to donate nearly everything: furniture, clothes, even the jewelry she'd hidden away. It felt cathartic, like we were shedding the weight of their betrayal. Christy joked about staging a housewarming for Karen and Greg in the afterlife, complete with all their worldly possessions. It was dark, but it made me smile. The financial side of things was another mess entirely. Both Karen and Greg had life insurance policies, and after weeks of wrangling with lawyers and insurers, Christy and I found ourselves with a substantial payout. Over $1.6 million between the two of us. It felt strange, almost wrong, to benefit from their deaths, but there was no point in refusing it. We decided to use the money wisely, splitting some for personal savings and donating the rest to charities that resonated with us. It felt like the right thing to do, a way to reclaim some good from all the chaos. Through all of this, Christy and I grew closer. She'd stay late at my house, helping me clean out old reminders of Karen, or just sitting with me as we talked about everything and nothing. Sometimes we laughed, other times we cried. It was a strange bond, built on shared pain, but also an understanding that no one else could offer. One night, as we sat on the porch with glasses of wine, Christy turned to me and said, "Daniel, do you ever think about what's next? What we're supposed to do with our lives now?" I hesitated. "Every day," I admitted, "but I don't have an answer. I just know I don't want to keep living in the past." "Me neither," she said softly. She looked out at the dark horizon, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe we can figure it out together." It wasn't a grand declaration or some life-altering moment, but it was enough. For the first time in a long time, I felt like there was a chance for something new, something better. And maybe, just maybe, we could build it together. As the weeks turned into months, Christy and I began to reshape our lives. It wasn't easy. Grief doesn't follow a straight line, and there were days when the weight of everything felt unbearable. But we leaned on each other, slowly piecing together a new normal. One afternoon, as we cleared out the last of Karen's belongings from my house, Christy paused, holding up an old photo album. It was from our early years of marriage, smiling faces, vacations, holidays. "Do you want to keep this?" she asked gently. I stared at it for a moment before shaking my head. "No, that's not my life anymore." Together, we flipped through the pages one last time, laughing at the awkward hairstyles and outdated fashion. It felt good to remember those moments for what they were, happy at the time, even if they'd ended in betrayal. Then, with a deep breath, I placed the album in the donation box. It was time to let go. Christy was going through her own process of detachment. She sold the house she'd shared with Greg, saying it was too big and too full of memories to keep. "It's strange," she admitted one evening as we packed up her kitchen. "You think you're building something permanent, but it's all so fragile." We'd grown comfortable in each other's presence by then, sharing the kind of honesty that only comes from shared pain. I catch myself watching her sometimes, marveling at her resilience. She'd been through just as much as I had, maybe more, but she faced it with a quiet strength that I couldn't help but admire. One evening, after we'd finished another marathon packing session, I blurted out something I hadn't planned to say. "You know, Christy, I don't think I would have gotten through this without you." She looked at me surprised and smiled. "I could say the same about you, Daniel. I guess we make a good team." The idea of being a team stuck with me. The more time we spent together, the more natural it felt. We'd fallen into a rhythm, sharing meals, running errands, even helping each other navigate the endless paperwork that came with insurance claims and estate settlements. It was a partnership in the truest sense of the word. Eventually, the conversations about the future grew more serious. One night, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, Christy brought it up. "You know," she began, swirling her wine glass, "I've been thinking, this house, it doesn't have to stay just your house." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" She laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. "I mean, we're already spending most of our time together. It just seems practical." It wasn't the most romantic proposal, but it wasn't meant to be. This was about survival, about finding a way forward together. "Practical," I echoed, smiling. "I like that." The next few weeks were a blur of moving boxes and rearranging furniture. Christy brought life into the house. New plants, cozy throws, little touches that made it feel less like a relic of my old life and more like a place where something new could grow. We didn't rush into anything. There were no grand declarations or plans for the future, just a quiet understanding that we were better together than apart. One night, as we sat in the living room, surrounded by the chaos of our unpacking, Christy turned to me and said, "Do you ever think about how we ended up here? Like, if it hadn't been for them?" I nodded. "All the time. It's strange, isn't it? How something so terrible could lead to something good." She smiled, a little sadly. "I guess life's funny that way. It wasn't a perfect beginning, but it was ours. We were two people trying to make sense of the wreckage, finding comfort and companionship in each other. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, not just for myself, but for us. The transition to living together was smoother than I expected. Christy and I had already spent so much time in each other's space that the change felt natural. She quickly put her stamp on the house. Nothing drastic, but enough to make it feel different. New curtains replaced the ones Karen had picked. Fresh plants sat in sunny corners, and little pieces of Christy's personality began to shine through. For the first time in years, the house felt warm, alive. We didn't define what we were. It wasn't a relationship, at least not yet, but it was more than friendship. It was a partnership born from tragedy, and for now, that was enough. We supported each other through the tough days, celebrated the small wins, and slowly started to dream about the future. One weekend, we decided to tackle a project together, repainting the living room. It had been Karen's idea to paint it a pale gray, a color I'd always hated but never mentioned. Christy laughed when I told her. "Gray?" She really went for corporate chic. "Huh?" We spent the better part of a Saturday debating colors, finally settling on a deep green that Christy said reminded her of the forest near her childhood home. As we worked, we talked about everything, our favorite memories, our regrets, the things we wanted to do with the rest of our lives. It felt good to open up, to let go of some of the weight I've been carrying. By the end of the day, we were both covered in paint, exhausted but happy. Christy stepped back to admire our work, a satisfied smile on her face. "Not bad for two amateurs," she said. "What do you think?" I looked at her, standing there with a streak of green paint on her cheek, and felt a warmth I hadn't experienced in years. "I think it's perfect," I said, and I wasn't just talking about the walls. As the weeks turned into months, our bond deepened. We started to build a routine. Lazy mornings with coffee on the porch, evenings spent cooking together, weekend hikes in the nearby woods. It was simple, but it was exactly what we both needed. We didn't talk much about Karen or Greg anymore. Not because we were avoiding the subject, but because they no longer dominated our lives. Slowly, they became part of the past, while Christy and I focused on the present. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching an old movie, Christy turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think it's strange?" she asked. "What?" "That we're here, together, after everything." I considered her question for a moment. "Maybe, but strange doesn't mean bad." She smiled at that, leaning her head on my shoulder. "You're right. It doesn't. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something close. A connection built on trust, understanding, and a shared desire to move forward. We weren't rushing into anything, but we were laying the foundation for something stronger, something real." One night, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Christy paused and looked at me. "You know, Daniel, I think we're going to be okay." I smiled, setting down the dish I was washing. "Yeah, Christy, I think so too." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. As Christy and I settled into our new life together, the world around us slowly began to take notice. Friends and family, who had initially been cautious about the situation, started reaching out more. At first, there were the inevitable questions. "How are you holding up? Are you two together?" Delivered with awkward curiosity. But over time, people seemed to accept what we already knew. We were a team, and we were doing the best we could to heal. One weekend, Christy suggested we host a small gathering. "Nothing fancy," she said, "just a chance to reconnect with people. I think we could both use it." I hesitated. The idea of entertaining felt daunting, like stepping into a spotlight I wasn't sure I was ready for. But Christy had a way of nudging me out of my comfort zone. "Okay," I agreed. "But keep it small. No more than 10 people." The evening turned out better than I expected. Our guests, mutual friends, a couple of Christy's coworkers, and my sister brought warmth and laughter into the house. For the first time in what felt like forever, I enjoyed myself without the shadow of Karen or Greg looming over me. At one point during the night, my sister pulled me aside. "You seem different," she said, her tone cautious but kind. "Happier, maybe?" I thought about her words for a moment before replying. "I think I am. It's not perfect, but it feels good. Simple." She smiled. "I'm glad, Daniel. You deserve that." After the guests left and the house was quiet again, Christy and I sat on the porch, finishing a bottle of wine. "You know," she said, her voice soft, "I wasn't sure how tonight would go, but I think it was exactly what we needed." I nodded. It felt good to let people in again, to feel normal. She smiled, leaning back in her chair. "You are normal." "Well, as normal as anyone can be after what we've been through." Her words stuck with me. We had been through hell, but sitting there with Christy, I realized how far we'd come. The weight of the past still lingered, but it no longer defined me. In the weeks that followed, Christy and I began to plan for the future. We talked about small things at first, fixing up the garden, taking a trip to the mountains, finding hobbies to share. But eventually, the conversations grew bigger. "What if we started something new?" Christy asked one night as we cooked dinner. "Like a business or a project, something we could do together." I raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" She shrugged, a playful smile on her face. "I don't know yet, but I feel like we're good at this, working together, solving problems. Maybe there's a way to turn that into something more." The idea intrigued me. I hadn't thought much about what came next, but for the first time, I felt a spark of excitement about the possibilities. "Let's think about it," I said, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the road ahead. The idea of starting something new together stayed with us, quietly taking root in our conversations. Christy had a way of planting seeds, ideas that seemed small at first but grew into something bigger the more I thought about them. One evening, as we sat on the couch with a notepad and a bottle of wine, we finally started to put those thoughts into words. "What do we love doing?" Christy asked, pen poised over the blank page. I chuckled. "Avoiding drama? Drinking wine?" She grinned. "Okay, true. But seriously, what would make us happy? Something we could build, something that feels meaningful." The question caught me off guard. I'd spent so long surviving, just getting through each day, that I hadn't thought about what made me happy in years. But as we talked, an idea began to form. Karen and Greg's betrayals had left scars, but they'd also taught us something valuable. The importance of honesty, of connection, of living a life that felt true. What if we created a space for people to connect? I suggested. A place where people could escape the noise, find peace, maybe even rebuild like we're doing. Christy's eyes lit up. "Like a retreat? Or a community center?" "Something like that," I said, warming to the idea. "A place where people can come together, not just to heal, but to grow." We spent hours brainstorming, sketching out ideas on paper napkins, and laughing at our own enthusiasm. By the end of the night, we didn't have all the details, but we had a vision. A retreat center, nestled somewhere quiet and beautiful, where people could reconnect with themselves and others. The next day, we started researching. Christy dove into logistics, locations, permits, funding, while I focused on the bigger picture, what we wanted the retreat to stand for. It wasn't just about offering workshops or yoga classes. It was about creating an environment where people felt seen, understood, and supported. It was daunting, and there were moments when doubt crept in. Could we really pull this off? Were we just chasing a pipe dream? But every time one of us started to falter, the other was there to pick them up. One weekend, we drove out to a small mountain town a few hours away to scout potential locations. As we walked through a sprawling property with a cabin and a lake, something clicked. The air was crisp and quiet, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. Christy grabbed my hand, her face glowing with excitement. "This is it," she whispered. I looked around, taking it all in. The towering trees, the stillness of the water, the sense of possibility. "Yeah," I said, a smile spreading across my face. "This could work." The purchase process wasn't easy, and there were moments when we thought we'd have to let go of the dream. But with a mix of determination, hard work, and a little luck, we made it happen. Standing in the middle of that property, the keys in my hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Not just in what we'd accomplished, but in the life we were building together. Christy wrapped her arms around me, her laughter ringing out in the crisp mountain air. "We did it, Daniel. We actually did it." I held her close, feeling the warmth of her against me. "Yeah," I said softly. "We're really doing this." Owning the property was only the first step, and as Christy and I stood on the cabin's porch overlooking the lake, we both realized how much work lay ahead. The retreat center was still just an idea, a dream waiting to be built, but it felt more real now. It was ours. The cabin itself needed serious renovations. The walls were lined with weathered wood that carried the faint scent of pine, but the floors creaked underfoot, and the plumbing was outdated. The grounds, though beautiful, were overgrown and dotted with debris from years of neglect. It wasn't much to look at yet, but to us it was perfect. "We'll make it work," Christy said, her hands on her hips as she surveyed the property. "It's going to take time, but this place has potential." "Potential," I echoed, grinning. "That's one way to describe it." We started small. Weekends became a flurry of activity, tearing down old wallpaper, sanding floors, painting walls. Christy was relentless, her energy contagious as she tackled each task with a mix of determination and humor. "You know," she said one afternoon, her face smudged with paint, "this is basically therapy, but with hammers." It wasn't just the physical work that bonded us. It was the shared vision. We talked endlessly about what we wanted the retreat to be: a place of peace, where people could unplug and focus on their well-being. Christy suggested meditation spaces and outdoor yoga platforms. I pitched the idea of hosting workshops where people could learn new skills or dive into creative projects. The more we talked, the more our vision took shape. Of course, not everything went smoothly. There were moments when we disagreed on designs, budgets, priorities. Christy had a penchant for bold, colorful decor, while I leaned towards simple, understated aesthetics. "We can't have another neutral room, Daniel," she'd say, rolling her eyes. "This isn't a dentist's office. And we can't have neon walls," I'd counter. "It's a retreat center, not a nightclub." But somehow we always found a middle ground. The process wasn't just about transforming the space. It was about learning how to work together, how to compromise, how to navigate challenges as a team. As the months went on, the property began to change. The overgrown grounds were cleared, revealing a stunning view of the lake. The cabin's interior, once dark and dated, became warm and inviting, with soft lighting and cozy nooks. We even built a fire pit near the water, where we imagined future guests gathering under the stars. One evening, as we sat by that fire pit with mugs of hot cocoa, Christy leaned her head on my shoulder. "You know," she said, her voice soft, "I wasn't sure if we could actually do this. But seeing it all come together, it feels real now." I wrapped an arm around her, the crackling fire casting a warm glow on her face. "It is real, and it's ours." She smiled, and for a moment, we just sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the night. It was the kind of peace we'd both been searching for, the kind we wanted to share with others. The retreat center wasn't finished yet. There were still rooms to furnish, programs to plan, and a million little details to iron out. But for the first time, it felt like we weren't just rebuilding after the storm. We were building something new, something beautiful, something that mattered. Months of hard work transformed the retreat center from a neglected property into something truly special. Christy and I poured ourselves into every detail, from designing the cozy guest rooms to crafting a welcoming outdoor space. By the time we finished, it was everything we had envisioned: a sanctuary for those looking to escape the noise of life and reconnect with themselves. We named it Haven by the Lake, a nod to the calm we'd both found there. The name felt fitting, not just for the guests we hoped to welcome, but for what the place had become for us: a haven in the midst of chaos. Opening day approached faster than we expected, and with it came a mix of excitement and nerves. Christy and I had spread the word through social media, local ads, and word of mouth. We didn't expect a flood of interest right away, but the inquiries trickled in steadily. It seemed like people were drawn to the simplicity of what we were offering, a chance to disconnect, recharge, and rediscover themselves. Our first group of guests arrived on a crisp autumn morning. Watching them step onto the property was surreal. There was a young couple, tired from juggling demanding jobs and a new baby. A middle-aged man who said he just needed a reset, and an older woman who shared that she'd been widowed earlier that year and was searching for peace. Each of them brought their own story, their own need for healing. Christy and I welcomed them personally, offering warm smiles and a tour of the grounds. We showed them the lake, the cozy common room with its crackling fireplace, and the little walking trails we'd cleared through the woods. Seeing their faces light up as they took it all in filled me with a sense of pride I hadn't felt in years. That evening, we hosted a welcome dinner around the fire pit. The group was quiet at first, hesitant to open up, but as the stars appeared and the fire crackled, something shifted. People began to share their stories, what had brought them to Haven, what they were hoping to find. It was raw and vulnerable, and for the first time, I saw the impact of what Christy and I had created. As I listened to their words, I glanced at Christy. She caught my eye and smiled, her expression a mix of pride and relief. It was a silent acknowledgement of how far we'd come, not just in building the retreat, but in rebuilding ourselves. Over the next few days, the guests settled into a rhythm. Mornings began with yoga on the outdoor deck, led by a local instructor Christy had brought on board. Afternoons were filled with workshops, painting, journaling, even guided meditation sessions. Evenings often ended by the fire, with more stories and laughter. One afternoon, I found myself sitting by the lake with the older woman Alice. She stared out at the water, her face calm but contemplative. "This place," she said after a long silence, "it reminds me of my husband. He loved the outdoors. I wasn't sure if I could come here without him, but I think he would have liked it." Her words hit me in a way I didn't expect. "I'm glad you came," I said softly. "And I think he would have liked it too." She smiled, a small but genuine smile that made me realize just how powerful this place could be. That night, after the guests had gone to bed, Christy and I sat by the fire pit, sipping tea and reflecting on the day. "This is what it's all about," she said, her voice full of emotion. "Helping people find peace. It's worth every late night and every blister." I nodded, my heart full. "It is, and I think we've found some peace too." Christy reached for my hand, and we sat there in silence, watching the embers glow. Haven by the Lake wasn't just a retreat for others. It was a symbol of everything we'd overcome. Together, we had turned pain into purpose, creating something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. The success of that first retreat gave us more than hope. It gave us momentum. Word spread quickly about Haven by the Lake, mostly through glowing reviews from our first group of guests. They shared stories about the peace they found, the breakthroughs they experienced, and the connections they made. Soon, we were fielding inquiries from people across the state, eager to escape their own chaos and find solace in our little sanctuary. Christy and I worked harder than ever, but this time, the work felt different. It wasn't just about keeping things afloat. It was about watching something we'd built together thrive. We expanded the programming, adding weekend retreats focused on mindfulness, creativity, and healing. We partnered with local experts, chefs, artists, therapists to offer unique experiences. Each decision we made felt like planting a seed, and every smile from a guest was proof that those seeds were growing. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Running the retreat pushed us in ways we hadn't anticipated. There were endless logistics to manage, unexpected expenses, and the occasional difficult guest. Christy and I had our fair share of disagreements, especially when it came to finances. She had big ideas, renovating the guest cabins, expanding the property, and I was often the one pumping the brakes. "We can't do everything at once," I'd argue, trying to balance optimism with caution. "We need to be smart about this." "And we will," she'd reply, her determination never wavering. "But we can't let fear hold us back. We didn't come this far just to play it safe." It wasn't always easy, but those moments of conflict only strengthened our bond. We learned to listen to each other, to respect our different perspectives, and to find compromises that worked for both of us. The retreat wasn't just teaching our guests how to grow, it was teaching us too. As the seasons changed, so did our relationship. What had started as a partnership built on shared pain was evolving into something deeper. There was a moment, one crisp winter morning, when I realized just how much Christy had come to mean to me. We were standing by the lake, watching the sun rise over the frost-covered trees. She turned to me, her cheeks pink from the cold, and smiled. It was a small, simple moment, but it hit me like a wave. "I don't think I could do this without you," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Christy looked at me, her eyes soft. "You don't have to," she said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." It wasn't a declaration of love. Not yet, but it was enough. Enough to know that we were in this together, that we'd found something real amidst the wreckage of our pasts. That spring, we hosted our largest retreat, yet a week-long event for people seeking not just rest but transformation. Watching the guests arrive, their faces a mix of hope and uncertainty, reminded me of how far we'd come. By the end of the week, those same faces were glowing with joy, gratitude, and a sense of renewal. One evening, after the last of the guests had departed, Christy and I sat on the porch with glasses of wine, reflecting on the week. "We did good," she said, clinking her glass against mine. "We did," I agreed, feeling a quiet pride in what we'd accomplished. "And I think this is just the beginning." She smiled, her eyes sparkling in the twilight. "I think so too. For the first time in years, my life felt whole. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined me. Christy and I had taken the broken pieces and built something beautiful together." The days at Haven by the lake blended into a peaceful rhythm. Each retreat brought a new group of people with their own stories, struggles, and hopes. Watching them transform over a few days, laughing, opening up, finding joy, was more rewarding than I could have imagined. It was like witnessing small miracles, and each one reminded me why Christy and I had started this journey. But as the retreat center grew, so did the complexity of running it. Balancing our professional responsibilities with our personal lives became more challenging. Late nights planning events and early mornings managing logistics left little time for us. Christy, ever the optimist, handled the pressure with her usual determination, but I could see it wearing on her. One evening, after a particularly hectic day, we sat at the kitchen table surrounded by paperwork. Christy sighed, rubbing her temples. "I'm starting to feel like we're running a business, not a retreat." I looked at her, surprised. "That's what it is, isn't it?" She shook her head. "No, Daniel. It's supposed to be more than that. It's supposed to be about helping people, about creating something meaningful. Lately, it feels like we're just trying to keep the wheels from falling off." Her words hit me harder than I expected because I'd been feeling the same way. Haven had become a success, but in the process, it had started to feel like a machine we had to keep feeding. Somewhere along the way, we'd lost the spark that had inspired us to start it. "Maybe we need to step back," I suggested. "Take a break, focus on why we started this in the first place." Christy nodded slowly. "You're right. We need to remember what this is really about." The next morning, we made a bold decision to temporarily scale back operations and take time to reassess. We postponed a few upcoming retreats, informed our regular guests, and blocked off a couple of weeks to focus on ourselves and the center's future. It felt risky, but it also felt necessary. During those weeks, we rediscovered the joy of the place we'd created. Instead of managing guest schedules, we spent quiet mornings by the lake, afternoons hiking through the woods, and evenings talking about our dreams for Haven. We let go of the pressure to make it perfect and focused instead on what made it special. One afternoon, as we sat on the dock, Christy turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about what's next for us?" she asked. I raised an eyebrow. "You mean besides Haven?" She nodded. "Yeah, like us." Her question caught me off guard, but I realized I'd been thinking about it too. "I think we're building something pretty incredible," I said carefully. "But I don't want to rush anything. I want to get it right." Christy smiled, her eyes soft. "Me too, and I think we are." It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was enough. We were moving forward step by step, building not just a retreat center, but a life together. By the end of our break, we felt recharged and ready to dive back in, but with a new perspective. We made changes to simplify operations, hired a small staff to help with day-to-day tasks, and focused on creating experiences that truly mattered. It wasn't about growth anymore. It was about meaning. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were exactly where we were meant to be. Scaling back and simplifying Haven by the Lake was the best decision we could have made. The retreat center transformed from a demanding project into a place of peace once more, not just for our guests, but for us, too. With a small but dedicated staff to help, Christy and I found the time to truly enjoy what we created and each other. Our connection deepened in ways I hadn't expected. The trust we built through our shared grief and hard work grew into something stronger, more intimate. We began sharing parts of ourselves we hadn't before. Childhood dreams, fears, the things we kept hidden even from ourselves. Christy had a way of drawing me out, of making me feel safe enough to be vulnerable. One night, as we sat by the fire pit, she told me about her late husband, Greg, in a way she never had before. "I don't think I ever really knew him," she admitted, staring into the flames. "Not the way I thought I did." Looking back, there were so many signs I ignored, so many times I convinced myself everything was fine. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You're not alone in that. I did the same with Karen. It's hard to see the cracks when you don't want to." She nodded, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "But with you, it's different. I feel like I can see all of you, your flaws, your fears, everything, and it doesn't scare me. It makes me want to know you more." Her words hit me with an intensity one wasn't prepared for. I'd spent so much time thinking I was broken beyond repair, that my past had left me too scarred to ever truly open up again. But with Christy, it felt possible. She saw me, not just the polished version I showed the world, but the real me, and she stayed. "I feel the same way," I said quietly. "With you, I don't have to pretend. I can just be." In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't just about the retreat center anymore, or the shared pain that had brought us together. It was about us, about the life we were building, and the possibility of love that felt deeper and more genuine than anything I'd known before. Over the next few months, our relationship evolved naturally. We stopped dancing around the question of what we were and embraced it fully. Christy moved her things into my room, and our lives became fully intertwined. It wasn't always easy. Merging two lives never is, but it was worth it. Our friends and family began to see the change in us. My sister, who had always been cautiously supportive, said it best during one of her visits. "You look happy, Daniel. Not just content, but truly happy." And it's been a long time since I've seen that. I glanced at Christy, who was laughing with my niece by the lake, her hair catching the sunlight. "I think I am," I said, a smile spreading across my face. For the first time in a long time. The happiness wasn't just in the big moments, but in the small ones, too. Christy's laughter as we danced in the kitchen, the way she always found a way to brighten my worst days, the quiet comfort of falling asleep beside her every night. It was the kind of love I hadn't thought I deserved, but one I was learning to embrace. One evening, as we watched the sun set over the lake, Christy leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "This feels like home." I wrapped an arm around her, my heart full. "It does. You're my home, Christy." For the first time, I knew it wasn't just the place or the work that had healed me. It was her. And together, we were building something even more beautiful than I could have imagined. The day Christy and I decided to host a celebration at Haven by the Lake felt like a culmination of everything we had worked for. It wasn't just a retreat for guests this time. It was for us, a way to mark the start of something new. We'd built this sanctuary together, grown it together, and now it felt like the perfect place to celebrate the life we created. It wasn't an extravagant event. That wasn't who we were. Instead, it was intimate and personal, with only a small group of friends and family gathered around the fire pit. Twinkling lights hung from the trees, their soft glow reflecting on the still water of the lake. Christy had spent the morning arranging simple wildflower bouquets, while I grilled dinner with my sister's help. It was imperfect and casual, but it felt exactly right. As the evening wore on, laughter filled the air. My sister told embarrassing childhood stories, and Christy's best friend shared tales of her stubborn determination to always follow her heart. Everyone seemed to know just how special this moment was, not just for us, but for what it represented, a new beginning. At one point, as the group toasted with glasses of wine, Christy leaned over and whispered, "This is perfect, Daniel." I smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "It really is." Then, standing in front of the people who had supported us through everything, I turned to Christy and took her hands. "I don't think I ever told you this," I began, my voice steady but full of emotion, "but you saved me. When my life fell apart, you were there, not just as someone to lean on, but as someone who showed me there's more to life than just surviving. You showed me how to live again." Christy's eyes glistened with unshed tears, her smile soft but radiant. "And you did the same for me," she said quietly. "I didn't think I'd ever find peace again, but you made me believe it was possible." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Gasps rippled through the group as I opened it to reveal a simple but elegant ring. "Christy," I said, my heart pounding, "I don't just want to build a life with you. You are my life. Will you marry me?" The world seemed to hold its breath as I waited for her answer. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded, her voice trembling but clear. "Yes, Daniel. 1,000 times yes." Cheers erupted around us as I slid the ring on her finger and pulled her into an embrace. The warmth of her arms, the scent of her hair, the sound of her laughter. It was a moment I knew I'd treasure forever. That night, as we sat by the fire with our friends and family, I realized just how far we'd come. The pain and betrayal of the past had shaped us, but it didn't define us. We'd taken that pain and turned it into something beautiful, something real. Haven by the Lake had become more than just a retreat for others. It was our sanctuary, our legacy, our home. And as Christy and I looked out at the shimmering lake, her hand resting in mine, I knew that this was just the beginning of the next chapter in our story. We had found peace, love, and purpose, and we'd done it together.